Hello. Thank you for joining us for this session on demystifying citizen development, separating fact from fiction. I'm Laura Faughtenberry. I'm the Director of Marketing at XVoucher, and I'm so happy to be joined today by some amazing panelists. Please help me in welcoming Raveesh Reddy, who is the VP of Sales and Partnerships at Quixie, May Amorelli, an IT business analyst at Shell, and Noel Carroll, who is the founder of Citizen Development Lab at the University of Galway.
Hello.
Today, we'll be discussing some of the myths and misconceptions surrounding citizen development. We'll also talk about how you can use citizen development to accelerate digital transformation and drive innovation. So first, let's start with the fact or fiction question. May, let's start with you. Citizen developers are a threat to professional developers and will soon replace them. Is that fact or fiction?
Yes, I guess it's a fiction because sometimes small initiatives that can benefit the company may get stuck in the IT funnel due to other critical priority projects. So CD enables the business to solve these problems by simplifying application development, unlocking these opportunities, right? It also mitigates the pressure on IT teams, allowing professional developers to focus on enterprise projects with global impacts, such as implementing ERP systems. The CD is a way to reduce frustration around the IT backlog while enabling fast and cheaper solution for business problems. And also, the CD program inspires employees to play a role in the company's digital transformation. So, in my previous experience, companies I've worked with didn't have sufficient budgets to invest in projects with, for example, less than 1 billion NPV. If a CD program were implemented, many inefficient processes could be automated using low code, no code, leading to significant cost savings and enabling the staff to do more value-adding work, which is much more energizing, right?
Great. Noel, what do you think about the topic?
Yeah, I can absolutely appreciate the, I suppose, misconception that professional developers will soon be replaced by citizen developers. But from our research, the idea that they will be replaced is something that I haven't seen any evidence around. So I think it's important to think about it from citizen developers who are individuals that have no, I suppose, kind of formal programming training. They are becoming more and more commonplace in the workplace. And that's often due to the rise in low code and no code development platforms. So I don't see them as replacing, but rather I see them as complementing each other. And I suppose it's important to think about how we look at I suppose, citizen developers, and they are typically working on becoming more prevalent in terms of replacing more simple tasks. For example, making app developments more accessible without coding experience. So on one hand, you've got the idea that professional developers are more responsible for designing and building more sophisticated software systems and more advanced strategic initiatives. But I think citizen developers and professional developers can actually work together to achieve better results. And I've seen that in practice, where citizen developers can provide valuable input in terms of user requirements, user experience, and business processes, and so on. Then you've got the professional developers that can provide the more technical expertise, ensure scalability, and address the major kind of security concerns. So if anything, I think collaboration between the two groups can actually lead to more, I suppose, efficient and effective development processes.
Right. And Raveesh, what are your thoughts on that from Quixie's standpoint as well?
So in fact, I would say for some more days or months or years, it'll look like a fact for everyone, because at a prima facie, everybody, you just say there's a citizen development trying to parallelly increase, and then obvious thought is like the actual professionals will actually have the problem. But like Noel said, there's no evidence yet, or this. I don't think there'll be an evidence that will be coming in future, because what citizen developers are trying to do is the part that actual developers are not able to do now. When I say that, the developers are actually trying to do, let's give it in percentages, if a digitization, if I have to take it to 100%, 20% is what the developers are actually achieving now. The 80% is not done because there's no bandwidth at all, and the business users are actually not pushing the IT teams because there's already an IT backlog, and they can't actually develop this or get this done. So the part that developers are not doing is what citizen developers are trying to do. So there is no overlap or replacement happening, right? But the very thought that, okay, this development is done by a citizen developer, is it replacing, looks like a fact, but it's actually a fiction. And to add to that, even today, right, or 10 years back, 20 years back, manufacturing segment, if I take, missions are coming in. Are we replacing somebody who is trying to do the design? CAD cams are coming in. Are we replacing them? So all these are examples where, if at all, a replacement also happens, it's very minimal. And that replacement also, the professionals who are trying to do that will start doing something else or even better things that they are actually have to do or are capable to do. So that's my 2 cents on that.
It's a great segue into our next question too, which, I think what you guys are also saying, IT has a huge backlog. Some of the times, citizen developers are able to solve problems that just wouldn't be a priority for them. So this actually helps you really get things to market faster that just wouldn't be at the front of the line. So some skeptics who aren't familiar with the concept of citizen development are afraid it's going to lead to chaos and inefficiency, and instead of improving, create shadow IT. Raveesh, let's stay with you on that because that was, a great segue into it. What do you feel, and how do you respond to, shadow IT?
I think shadow IT, it comes in or it kicks in at a later stage of the adoption, and there are governance or the policies that the organizations have to put in forward to make sure that does not happen. The problem is, right, like for example, if I have to say Shell or any organization that they're trying to adopt, they initially start with trying to explore. That means they're just exploring, they don't do everything. Or when the explore happens, um, every department, let's say 10-15 departments out there, they try to do whatever they like to do, whatever they wanted to do. Nothing goes into the core system, so nothing happens at that point of time. So when the actual scale happens, that means an organization explores it, understands it's a good for them, and by the time they go to the scale, they have to make sure this governance, like, do I allow everybody to develop? While they are developing, who has to make sure that whatever they are developing interfaces with the core system, does not interface with the core system, or does it need iteration before it gets to use to some by every user of that particular use case. So there are multiple things that one particular team. That's where, as Noel rightly said, it's a combination. The more adoption happens, it's a combination of citizen developers and also the IT team, because IT team is the one which will decide or tell the citizen developer team or this team that is parallelly there whether to take this into the core system or not, when to take this into the core system, what additional things that we can do so that we can take into. So all this governance policies are to be there or should be there, which is where I think a very clear thought or policies put forward by PMI, if I'm not wrong, where they've talked about what is this process or progression that you should take as an organization when you actually go from a stage to um, explore, adopt, and scale. So when it actually goes to the scale station or scale stage, you will have that problem if you don't get to put up your governance policies.
That makes complete sense, and governance is obviously very important to keep in mind. Noel, how do you respond to the idea that citizen development can lead to shadow IT?
Sure. Well, I think the idea of connecting shadow IT with citizen development, I think that's I think it's important to take a step back to realize that organizations are actually suffering from shadow IT anyway. And I don't see citizen development as being a gateway to shadow IT, but rather a solution to trying to address shadow IT. So the claim that citizen development can lead to, I think it was chaos and inefficiency, I think that's really an oversimplification maybe of the situation, because it's true that citizen development can lead to challenges, as well as any IT development, as well as any IT practices. But there are ways to mitigate against the risks. And as part of our research, what we're beginning to see is that it's often done in a controlled and secure manner. And there's a number of ways which I suppose began to see in more recent times. So first, I think it's important to think about how citizen development can lead to many benefits. And I think these were explored in yesterday's session, such as empowering the business user to create applications, to automate processes, to reduce the backlog of IT and improve innovation. So these are the things that we hear a lot about time and time again. However, I suppose it's important to also think about that to ensure that these benefits are realized, it's important to have proper governance and control, I suppose, mechanisms in place. And one way that we're seeing more of this in practice is that organizations are beginning to establish clear guidelines, clear policies around how you govern that development process. And these policies can often define, for example, the types of applications that you or I can develop as citizen developers. How do you begin to establish guidelines around data security, for example, access controls, and the whole application lifecycle management? So the really good organizations out there that are making clear pathways in this, they're setting clear rules and guidelines around how organizations can minimize the risk of what they often describe as rogue developers or rogue citizen developers from going off into a tangent and doing their own thing, which does not actually achieve any of the organizational standards or objectives. Another approach that I see more and more of is around training and support for citizen developers. And I think this is important because it allows organizations to create a sense of what is, like good citizen development in terms of developing better applications and to follow best practice. So by investing in training and support, you can empower citizen developers to actually create really high quality applications, including best practice. And I often use this book, for example, to say, well, this is like almost the rules of the road, if you like, in terms of how you should go about that best practice. And I think it's also important to look at how you established that oversight and control mechanisms to manage that sprawl and to ensure that, I suppose, any of the citizen developed applications are integrated also into the larger IT ecosystem, because citizen development doesn't actually stand alone in the organization. It's important to think about how it fits in almost like a Lego block into the wider kind of system. So in doing so, I think you can have that governance model, and I've published a piece around how Shell had really done a successful job on this, and offer that visibility around here's the standards that we adhere to, here's the applications that we, the principles and practices that we must adhere to, and how they're reviewed, how they're integrated and tested over time. So I think it's important to think about citizen development. Sure, it can lead to challenges, but the risk can often be mitigated in terms of the proper governance, the proper training, the oversight mechanisms, and so on. And by doing so, that cuts down or that minimizes that risk.
Absolutely. And that's a fantastic segue to May, which, you guys have done a fantastic job at Shell bringing the citizen development into, teams, and you've got a whole department where you have a do-it-yourself. Kind of talk a little bit about how that was brought about and how you guys have gone about that, because you have implemented that governance and you have brought in the training and certifications, and it's gone a long way.
Yes, for sure. For sure, implementing effective governance around CD matters is crucial to prevent these potential issues, and also involving IT in the early phase of projects is essential in guiding developers on topics such as confidentiality, integrity, and information security. This approach also provides an IT perspective on existing applications with similar goals to prevent app duplication or rework. Additionally, is vital for the company to track and monitor the applications being created, right? And develop strategies to manage their life cycle. So companies must have the database with key information on the application, and all solutions are centralized under the IT managed platforms. At Shell, the DII coaches, we call it, play a remarkable role in being this link between the DII risk compliance structure and the IT perspective, right? Within our communities, we are the local proximate players ensure that we have this sort of control in place. And we also provide trainings, boot camps, awareness sessions to have our developers aligned with our DIY strategies and compliance risk assessment, right?
Great. And so should IT, this brings us to our next question, which is, should IT be wary of the apps that citizen developers are creating? And can they be, or are they always, security risks, which, I mean, always is a strong term. So can they be security risks, and how do you kind of overcome that? May, let's stay with you on this one, since you kind of pushed into that topic.
Okay. So the digital world is evolving in a rapid pace, right? Posing a significant threat to professional developers, and with an increasing workload that exceeds the capacity of IT departments, we need more developers. And as technology becomes more interlaced in our lives, it's evident that we all require a great number of skilled developers. So that's why we need all these trainings to align the developers with our risk, security risk templates and all that we need to have in place before start to develop something, some applications, right? And let's see what I can add. We have all these risk assessments in place to give them their awareness about what we need for information security and confidentiality and stability of the applications, right?
Great. Okay, Noel, how do you feel? I mean, do you think that citizen development can be a burden to IT teams, or how do you resolve that?
So, well, I think the idea of citizen development being a burden to what we often see is an overworked IT team in terms of creation of new apps. And the security risks, I think you mentioned. So I think security risks should also be front and center of any strategic initiative. The adoption of citizen development. It's now one of the main concerns across many organizations. Like cybersecurity is kind of front and center. So I think it is important that the risks are being considered around security. I don't think it's entirely accurate to say that citizen development is a burden on IT teams and that all citizen developed applications are security risks, because I think security risks come with any type of IT development, regardless of the size or the organization. But I think the citizen development actually can alleviate, and I think that was mentioned at yesterday's session, that your citizen development can alleviate the burden on IT teams, because it allows the business users or the citizen developers to create the more, I suppose, simple applications and automate routines. It reduces the number of requests that IT teams also receive, because it cuts back on that demand. It also frees up what we're beginning to see. It frees up the time for IT teams to focus on the more complex project and the more strategic initiatives, rather than them small, low-hanging fruits. I think it's also important to think that it's true that citizen-developed applications do pose security risks, but not all applications are created equally. And again, that applies to any IT or software development. And by implementing the proper governance, like I just discussed, and the control mechanisms, organizations can look at how citizen-developed applications are developed in a more secure manner. And again, like the Shell case is a perfect example of that. They can include, for example, implementing checks around the data security control, access control, and the application, I suppose, life cycle. I've also seen how organizations are beginning to take advantage of low-code and no-code development platforms, and they often provide pre-built security controls and compliance features. So these platforms, I think, allow or maybe support citizen developers to create applications that already comply with organizational standards and the whole regulation compliance also. So, for example, financial services or healthcare, there's all these inbuilt kind of security checks along the way for some of them. So that reduces the burden for IT teams also to have to go along and validate each application. So I think it's important for any organization, regardless of the adoption of citizen say, development or not, to be weary of the risks and challenges that new practices are bringing into an organization, but also to think about the benefits by enabling the business user to create the applications to automate routine tasks. But more importantly, I think it's important to think that by identifying the risks, you can also implement proper governance and control mechanisms. And again, that allows the organization to ensure that these developed applications are developed in a really secure manner and they meet the organizational standards. So you set the template as an organization and make sure that the citizen developers and indeed the IT teams comply with that expectation. And I think by leveraging the innovations around low code and no code platforms and the pre-built security controls, organizations, from what we begin to see is organizations are beginning to reduce the burden on IT teams and they can focus on the more strategic initiatives.
No, that's perfect. And it honestly leads into Raveesh perfectly because Quixie has a no code. Quixie is a no code platform that allows you to, speed up your creation of these applications and then also include some of those security implementations. So Raveesh, talk a little bit about how you feel about, how that might have been taken.
Yeah, that's out of all the questions, this is one the question that I'd love to answer, right? So, May said, basically there are two things here, right? One, we're talking about the security risk, but also when you're trying to put all this governance policies, why am I working with another team trying to put all this as a burden onto the IT team? So the security risk or any other risk associated with the low code, no code, same thing is associated with the technical if you're trying to do it with traditional approach. Right? There are things that are there are models that you follow, there are templates that they work on, libraries that they work on to get away from that risk. So similarly, if there are platforms like Quixie, the other platforms also, which are trying to bring in that models and templates into the system, into the platform itself, you use them and then continue. That means you're up to the standard to the cybersecurity, you're up to the standards of whatever OWASP or any other the vulnerability assessments that you wanted to get these applications go through. So it always depends on the platform that you're trying to use. So when you're evaluating, when you're trying to get a platform adopted into your organization, one of the criteria that somebody have to look at are these. Do they have these models in place? Do they talk about applications that are built on the platform or already vulnerability free or say without any security risks? So if they're saying that, you evaluate it. That's where IT team is also should be part of the evaluation team. So that is the first on the security. It's both on traditional and low code and no code. On the burden to the IT teams, I would always answer it with a manager trying to do the transition or somebody who is trying to give the responsibilities to some of the team. You have to do that additional work to train them or to maybe try to put up some uh, or put a part of yours into them, right? So that definitely makes IT team trying because whatever they are supposed to do or they could not do, that is when the citizen development is evolving. So when that is happening, that means it's actually part of it should be part of IT team only, right? The end of the day, they are the ones who are trying to say yes, this goes through, this does not go through. Who actually does it's a citizen developer. So initially, while they have to put those governance or they have to make sure this team is set up, everybody understands on the organization level what needs to be done. At that stage, IT will have to put that extra work, but that does not mean it is not giving them fruit. So at a later stage, they've been given that advantage of maybe I use my time for exploring better technology, right? So today I want all the developers to sit and build products like ChatGPT, right? I don't want them to come and sit and build a small workflow in an organization which is just allowing me to approve, right? I don't need developers to do that. So these developers should be doing that. So to allow them to do that, that means do wonders on the traditional approach where it's actually required. Not everything can be done through no code, low code. I can't build a ChatGPTs or kind of platforms on a low code, no code platform. Low code, no code, we're talking about the like Noel said, there'll be ancillary processes that are required, or complementing process that are required. That is what we are trying to build. So when these teams take that additional, I would not call that burden, additional responsibility to set up this process, governance, and getting the team up to that level of like May said, standards, right, within the organization. While we're having a traditional approach, we had some standards. Are we maintaining the same standards with this adoption into low code, no code? Is the only thing that IT teams make sure that happens. So I would not call it a burden. It's a responsibility given to them, or if not them, anybody else who is like Noel said, a PMI certified an architect can take care of that. So it's definitely not a burden. It's a responsibility. On the security side, it's absolutely platforms are evolving every day. This today, one platform will say you don't have to build or go through your VAPTs, vulnerability assessment and penetrating testings, because the platform is through. The platform that you're using is through, so the app that you're building is absolutely clear. You don't have to even test them, don't have to even get certifications for them. That's where I think no code also adds in. That's a third point that I want to bring in is, if you're trying to do everything with no code, again there'll be some limitations with that. The maximum that you can achieve in an application, let's say out of your 10 applications that you're trying to build, 8 are done through no code. And when I say no code, absolutely no code. Then I've just put the Lego box together. There's nothing can go wrong with it. If I do a little bit of low code, if I throw a little bit of whatever full code or additional component to that, that is when I'm introducing some risk factors. So that is when you'll have to go through some processes. So that's where even absolutely no code platforms which can achieve the complexity that you require will actually play a bigger role in future.
That makes complete sense. And I think I was looking at the chat, and someone named Matthew said, he thinks the misalignment is in the attitude and motivation between citizen developers and traditional software developers, which that matters in determining, whether it becomes shadow IT or a problem or a burden, or if it's not, right? So I think basically it's about communication. And I know, May, you also mentioned, you guys have those steps in place. You have those, provisions set so that when to go to different departments to make sure everyone's kind of in line, right? So it really does all come back to communication too. Okay, so another true or false question. Noel, let's start with you on this one. So are apps that are built by citizen developers able to be enterprise ready in terms of performance and stability?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'd love to have a little crystal ball, because I'm beginning to see how a lot of organizations now are beginning to adopt the likes of AI, for example. And I'm looking at evolutions or advancements in the likes of kind of auto GPT, where they're looking at ways in which they can go from almost voice commands to app development. And what's coming down the line is absolutely phenomenal, I think, over the next couple of months, if not year or so. So I think the idea that apps that are developed by citizen development are not enterprise ready as such is probably not entirely accurate. So I think it's probably true to think that citizen development typically involves the use of low code, no code platforms, and they obviously have their limitations. It is possible to develop enterprise ready applications, and I've seen that in practice quite a bit. I think firstly, if you think about it, modern low code and no code platforms are designed to support complex applications. And they can provide various features and integrations, and platforms are continuously evolving. And again, with AI coming down the road, it's like citizen development on steroids. It's looking at ways in which you can have new features, new functionalities, added support in terms of enterprise-grade applications. And I'm beginning to see that there's a bigger push now for the creation of more robust and high-performance applications in terms of the use of these platforms. I also see how citizen developers may not have the same level of technical expertise as professional developers. I think we just discussed that earlier. They can also create high quality applications by following, again, kind of best practice, by leveraging the platform with say built-in functions. And an example of that would be, for example, like low code, no code platforms that have pre-built integrations in popular enterprise systems. So many of us are familiar with the likes of Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics, for example. So by leveraging the integrations, I think citizen developers can build applications that are, I guess, tightly integrated into other enterprise applications. The third thing that I'm beginning to see, I think, is the possibility of incorporating more testing and quality assurance as part of that citizen development workflow. And again, the Shell case is a perfect example, I think best in class, if nothing, to ensure that the applications are enterprise ready. So it's not just released into the wild and fingers crossed. There are steps there, as you mentioned earlier, Laura. An example that I saw only recently is the integration of development processes which ensure that applications are tested for performance and stability. So it's not just, again, kind of released with a fingers crossed approach. And that's done at an enterprise level. It's not done at an individual level. And I think there are limitations to low-code and no-code platforms for enterprise application development, but it is possible to create enterprise applications. And again, as I mentioned, the likes of Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics are just examples. So when you leverage the features that are already there, you follow best practice, you align with the likes of kind of PMI, and I'm not promoting this, I'm not on any commission, but it's a really good piece of work in terms of the step-by-step approach. It allows you then to look at how you can test and go through the proper quality assurance processes to create more robust, high-performing applications and perfectly suitable for the enterprise environment.
No, I mean, training and certification it always plays in really well. And obviously you instruct students every day. And so that's a big part of what this becomes, right? Talk a little bit about, I guess some of the applications or just what you've seen with being able to create, enterprise ready type applications at Shell.
Yes, and also today's CD platforms offer inherent stability by being built on a scalable cloud infrastructure, which makes them more resilient to change. And with the help of experienced IT professionals, business developers can leverage this stability to improve the performance of their applications, right? As technology continues to evolve, these platforms will continue to offer improvements such as responsive user interface and optimized data backends. Moreover, these platforms cater to both citizen and pro developers by providing professional development environments. These environments offer a range of tools and features that are suitable for developers with different level of expertise. And the end result in that most solutions perform well and meet expectations of developers using them. But however, there is always a room for improvement and innovation, and CD platforms will undoubtedly continue to evolve in response to change business needs and technology advancements. Right.
Right. And I think the beauty of citizen development is that there is no creep of scope, right? Like you can constantly be innovating and pushing your application forward. So you can always be advancing it. Raveesh, what do you think about the notion of enterprise ready apps built by citizen developers?
Yeah. So when it comes to no code, low code, the enterprise, I would always try to define it a little differently. When I say define it a little different, whatever you build in through low code, no code, if an entire organization or a complete department is able to use it, then I will call it an enterprise ready flow that you've built, an enterprise ready application that you've built through no code, low code. Why I say that is because you've gone through this governance levels, you've gone through the security levels, and you've given an application where in a department, let's say in a companies like Shell, each department might have like 300, 500, or maybe definitely in hundreds of people. If they're able to use and then they bring in effectiveness, the application is enterprise. But there's an other aspects to it when you call it like Noel said, the finger crossed approach, right? I'll just publish it and then see. I hope it works. Right? So it definitely is the case for few platforms where you publish it. Especially it is when it comes to the mass usage, right? When you're trying to publish it for the consumer usage. Right? So that's why we differentiate enterprise ready between the B2B applications, that means business to business applications, and being enterprise ready in business to consumer applications. In B2C, there is a lot of improvement or more and more enterprise ready platforms are required, or there's a gap there, maybe it's a good idea for somebody to put on them, try to have a platform which can address that. But in within B2B, the enterprise is all about security. You're able to scale when you require it, whether it is horizontal or vertically. Mia said, where you will be able to deploy it. The platforms will be deployed on-prem or your own clouds. You can just put an elastic cloud and then let it expand whenever it is. So the platform should support that. So the moment they are supporting that, I would call them enterprise ready. So there are platforms like Quixi is also an enterprise ready B2B platform which can give where you can build these kind of applications. On the performance, there are certain standards that if you ask the platform, they'll say if you're deploying it on your premise, right? And what kind of applications that you're trying to build uh, uh, against the concurrency or the actual parameters of the infra that you also trying to associate with that. That will definitely uh, negate the problem of the performance. But again, like I said, like even in the application development, also in the deployment, IT team and the citizen developer team should go hand in hand and try to get. We'll have to solve those problems. But on the B2C, definitely there's a problem on the performance side, because you definitely don't know what kind of concurrency comes in at one day. I build a um, Amazon like app and then I just leave it to consumers. They just come in and then it crashes. You don't know what to do with that also when it happens.
Great. So I guess that leads into the next question, which is, another fact or fiction. So can citizen developers only create small and simple applications and they can't build complex enterprise applications? Raveesh, let's stay with you on that.
Yeah. So I would say again, we to answer that quick, we have built a ERP on Quixi. So enterprise resource planning software with modules like your HRMS, your asset management, material management. We built it on Quixi. Does that mean I can build I can replace SAPs and Oracles with this? No. When you talk about complexity, can you achieve or can you not? I will say yes. Should you do it on low code? Low code? No. I'll tell you. I'll tell you why. Because SAPs or Oracles, how many years they've put in on their domain, right? If you go and ask, I'll ask the question to Shell, right? If you want to put your entire core system of finance on 5 people within your organization or 10 people within your organization thinks that this process is right, and they build that they want the entire organization to use it. The problem is actually there, not in the platform. So to achieve that complexity, you will have ways to achieve it in this. But whether whatever you're trying to build is right or not, for you to know it is right, it will take a lot of time when you're actually playing with that complex applications. Whereas if you take the built-in ERPs, I'm just giving one example as an ERP. So if you use them, nothing, at least to that extent, nothing goes wrong, or they don't have to even worry about, okay, whatever process that is there, it works and it helps. Now, extending to that, does ERPs cover every process that an organization wants? No, that is the gap. So I've seen organizations trying to build. We have a few customers who try to build the that means it coexists. Both their ERP and the Quixi platform coexist for them, where they have their core processes running in ERPs, but there are complementing or the process that makes the existing process more effective than what it is today. It can be both ways. They did not get few users onto the ERP because it's costly. It takes time for adoption for most of them. If it's a simple mobile app, it's just a data entry, and then make it easier for the few set of users, and it makes it effective. So that complementing and ancillary or process that bring in effectiveness is what you try to build. Can you not build a complex? You can, but you should try to refrain from it if you're not the domain expert you don't have the layout ready for what needs to be built.
That makes sense. May, have you seen any examples at Shell where, you know, you've kind of stopped, or you've said maybe this one isn't perfect for citizen development?
Yeah, actually, based on my experience, I've observed that developers often start their CD journey by working on small and simple applications. This helps them to gain knowledge of the tools and process involved before move on to maybe not more complex project, but more valuable solutions. And the success of this approach largely depends on the developer's appetite to upskill, right? And the benefits that the business can see from the local no-code solution packed. And it's important to ensure that the application being developed benefits the citizen developer's job as well. Automating manual activities, for example, can make problem solving more energizing and fulfilling. And this, it in turn, can increase interest in tackling bigger projects. As the saying goes, think big, start small, right?
That makes sense. Noel, what have you seen as well?
Sure. So from our research, I think it's important to look at maybe it's probably less about the size or complexity, but rather a lot more focus actually on the business value. So what is the business value of actually developing this app, and then what is the complexity in doing so, and trying to weigh up the pros and cons of actually developing that application to achieve the business value goals and so on. So I think while it's probably true that many citizen developers might not have the same technical expertise as professional developers, they can create complex enterprise applications, if you want to describe it as that, using low code, no code. And again, I know I mentioned the likes of Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics. There are many more, but I think it's important to think about, on one hand, you've got this rapid evolution of technology, and I'm using AI as an example, which is driving expectations and the promise of technology. And we got this whole piece around digital transformation and how technology is advancing. And at the same time, you've got a bigger push to try and empower citizen developers to try and play a part in that journey around citizen development. So the complexity, I think, of developing applications is going to change, and it's going to put more, I suppose, emphasis on the likes of AI technology, for example, to support with that complexity and that reasoning process. And that's including things like, we say, workflow, including, we say, business rules and integration with, I suppose, APIs and things like that. So it's going to be a wide range of what we see as pre-built components or templates as part of this low code, no code. But I think with advancements in technology, it's going to improve and support citizen developers to kind of break down that complexity a little bit. I think citizen developers can also leverage around guidance and support around complex applications. So you've got the professional developers who can help citizen developers with the design, the architecture, the coding, for example, and providing the necessary technical expertise. And on the other hand, you've got the citizen developers that can support the technical IT staff understand the business case more. So again, it goes back to, I think, the first question around trying to get the citizen developer and the IT professional to work together and collaborate to understand and break down that complexity. So I think organizations, again, can implement proper governance, proper control mechanisms to ensure that that relationship exists between IT professionals and citizen developers. Because I know if I was running an organization, I would not want citizen developers just going off into a tangent, doing a solo run on developing complex applications that certain functions within the organizations are now hinging upon. So I think that collaboration between the two units is important. And that's really to look at, again, like things like security risk controls, access controls, and the whole application lifecycle management to ensure that, by developing complex applications, that it doesn't jeopardize quality and performance of that business unit. So I think even from a citizen developer's perspective, even though they might not have the technical expertise as professional developers, they can still create complex enterprise applications using low code, no code. But I think to do this in a safe and professional manner, it's important to have that collaboration between the IT professionals and the citizen developers so that they can work together to ensure that they meet the organizational standards and the regulatory requirements, which is also important as part of that complex unit.
I know that people in the comments have been talking about the suitability assessment that exists within PMI as well, which is a great way to kind of see, does this project fit into these boxes here, or does it need to go into another one? We've also got a question in the chat about what are some best practices for managing the risks and ensuring compliance when building apps around citizen development. So May, do you want to start and answer that one?
Yes, sure. That's a really interesting question, because to create an effective risk assessment of solution, it's important to establish clear boundaries, right? For instance, business critical process, SOX compliance requirements, or a case that handle competitively sensitive information should have proper controls in place. Or it may even be necessary to prohibit citizen developers from working on such projects altogether. To determine the appropriate level of control for each application, the risk level must be assessed. Higher risk applications will require tighter controls to minimize the potential impact of any security breaches or other issues.
That makes sense. Raveesh, how do you feel about that as well? Best way to manage the compliance and.
So one best way to manage the compliance is it has to be written somewhere and then you process it. There are ways within the traditional approach, right? On day one, even traditional approach did not become a best way to. Why is one company flourishing than the other is because of the policies or what they have put in across. Like there are CMM level 3, CMM level 5s or kind of processes, agile, everything for traditional. So the similar kind of governance policies are which PMI has published a case there. So use them, start evaluating them. There are a few things where, like Matt was also saying in the comments, where that is one policy where you don't do everything in citizen development. You have to put some sustainability policy. So on whether you have to build this in here or you don't have to build in, whether it has to come into this bucket or not. So and does that few apps need their security or not? Does they don't need? If you build to this extent, then you don't need to go through this 1, 2, 3 stages. So all these are the policies or governance that has to come in, that has to kick in from at least a scale stage in any organization. It's again the two different approaches where from the citizen developer himself he tries to bring this platform into the organization trying to make the business users adopt to this. So when it comes from one single user to the team and then slowly it takes a lot of time. When it comes from organization, you can actually start from day one putting this governance and then following likewise.
Much easier when you put the governance in place first, for sure. Noel, what are your thoughts on this? And then we're going to wrap it in a minute.
Yeah, so what we see is, like, I guess any organizations that are thinking about the adoption of citizen development are typically agile or have got that agile mindset. And we know from like a lot of the work that PMI have done that citizen development has now moved into this hyper agile space. So many organizations are either adopting certain methods or like Scrum or Safe or something like that, and they have that in place already. And this is just almost another layer in terms of how they operate. So I think actually having these methods or agile principles and practices in place helps to create that culture around citizen development. It creates kind of a sense of that, I suppose, hyper agility that I mentioned earlier. But that's really important because what we see in various case studies is that it's important to get that buy-in from leadership, that they see the importance that citizen development has got this business value. It's going to drive some initiative. It's going to drive efficiencies and improvements. They then look for ways in which they can choose the right platform to fit their organization and their business needs. And within that, what we saw, like even like across the research that we do, that it's important to look at defining new roles, because if nothing changes within the organization and you've adopted citizen development, a lot of people that we've kind of interviewed kind of get a sense that it's the same way that we do business, and it's important to look at how does citizen development now add something new. So creating new goals, creating new objectives, and trying to understand how citizen development can be tailored to our organizations as such. So companies are beginning to look at developing their own citizen developer framework and using that as a way to communicate how things are done here in the organization, and allowing people then to identify where they can contribute towards that. So when you have that, you begin to establish the citizen development kind of governance structure, and that's tailored then for organizations based on their objectives, based on their budgets and so on. And in doing so, it allows you to identify the kind of benefits and drawbacks and understand where you begin to mitigate against the risks, develop a plan for change management, and then look at ways in which you can actually promote the citizen developer culture. And of course, one of the best I've seen is with Shell, where they have their kind of hackathons, kind of Shark Tank events, and they begin to not only promote citizen development, but also to celebrate it in terms of the benefits and the business value that is brought into an organization. And that nurtures this idea of a collaborative environment, and it begins to grow organically.
Great. I think that makes great sense, and that's a great way to wrap it. Thank you so much to all of our panelists today. Thank you for watching. There's another session later today on practical tips and resources, and then there's more sessions throughout the week. So be sure to clue yourself in and watch more of the Citizen Development Week sessions. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.